In this webinar, we're going to talk about how you can build your skills in CR. We're going to talk about a method called pre-thinking, but before that, we will talk about the skill of or the ability to visualize information. It's something that is really critical when it comes to answering verbal questions, whether you're talking about CR or RC, as well as when you go towards TPA. And it's also an extremely critical skill when it comes to GI and TA. Okay. It was a free session. I expect about 120 odd students in the webinar. I have about 65 students right now. And for those of you who, let's just ask a couple of questions. How many of you did the pre-session diagnostic question? This was something that was presented to you right after you registered for the webinar. It was on the post-registration page here. How many of you did that? Okay. If you did not do that, if you click on the CR diagnostic, you can do that, and you can look at the solution. It's a phenomenal question. It tells you why you're faltering, where you're faltering, and what should you do about it. And we're going to follow a very similar approach in this webinar as well, but that just gives you one additional, I'd say, tool to practice on. Okay. And then, since this is a free webinar, I'm going to ask a bunch of leading questions just to get to know you guys a bit more. So my first question is, what's your target GFE score? I'm going to put this over here. We hide this. And for those of you, who are not as much aware of the GFE scoring system, 645 on the Focus edition is equivalent to the 700 on the current edition. The median score at Harvard is expected to be about between a 665 and a 675. The median score at Stanford is expected to be between a 675 and a 685. 99 percentile, which was the 760 on the older GMAT, or what we call as a GCE, is a 705. It's 99 percentile. So when you make a choice, just be aware of what your what those scores, and then you make a choice. With that, let me end the poll, broadcast results, and what I see over here is about 40% of the classes in the 99 percentile zone, 20% in the 100 percentile zone, 30% in the 655 to 695, which is 710 to 750, and then we have about 8% who are in the 605 to 645 and 555 to 595. And then the other question that I have is, when do you plan to take the test? You can really see, and I'll look at about 78%, about 80% of you either have more than a month and a half or haven't taken a date as of yet. And then 75%, give or take, but 25% of you have your exam in the next 45 days. For those of you who have your exam in the next 45 days, if you need if you need help, if you're an e-GMAT, make sure you write to the e-GMAT team. If on the other end, you're not an e-GMAT, if you need to figure out where you are, we have a phenomenal mock test, SegMax mock. We offer one free mock. Also, if for those of you who are not connected with me on my LinkedIn, do connect with me on my LinkedIn. I have upwards of 20,000 students who are connected with me on LinkedIn. And essentially, if you want to connect with students at any B school, this would be a really great way for you to do that. With that, I'm going to ask another poll question. Are you a paid student? If you're a paid student, select yes. If you're not a paid student, then select no. Let me hide this poll here. And while you're doing that, we have some upcoming webinars. We have a free webinar on algebra. In this, we're going to talk about inequalities and absolute value. It's tomorrow. So in this webinar, we're going to start from the very basics, and then we are going to go to the most advanced concepts. And then we have a free webinar also on arithmetic. So arithmetic and algebra are the two pillars of GMAT Quant. So one webinar this Sunday, another one next Saturday. In this, we're going to cover every aspect, starting from number properties to PNC and probability, and some part of word problems as well. So again, if you want to focus on one of these areas, then you can select register for these webinars. right. So about 70% of your paid students. I would like to get a few more inputs. I have about 71 students here in the webinar. If I can get a few more inputs, that'd be great. All right. Just give me 1 second. I'm going to go right in the webinar pane. I'm going to mute myself for about 30 seconds. I want to make sure that I have a sample account for you. And the screen should have settled down for you, and you should be seeing CR1 pre-thinking for assumption. So we'll have three parts to this webinar. In the first part, we're going to talk about your study plan. In the second part, we're going to talk about pre-thinking, which is the crux of this webinar. And the third part, we're going to talk about if you have any questions that I've not been able to answer during this webinar, if those questions are about in general your GMAT preparation, amongst other things, and we're going to talk about that. Okay. Sanchit says journey tool. Sanchit, thank you for asking me. I'd record a video on that and share that with you. First things first, how many of you have a study plan? Let me ask this poll question here. How many of you have a study plan? About 61% of you have a study plan. All right. So with that, let me just walk you through quickly how to create your own study plan, and then we can go from there. All right. So in this video, in the first 5 minutes, I'm going to really talk about how to build your study plan. So one of the first things you've got to decide when you want to build your study plan is what's your target GMAT score. I'm going to put that at 685. And I said this is target. It's about 97 percentile, which is a 740 on the classical GMAT. Then I'm going to put your current GMAT score. Let's say we put that score as 605. 5 over here, and I say this is taken a sigma x mock test, and so it will tell you you've got to go from a 75th percentile to a 97th percentile, and then it will ask you for your sectional scores. I'm going to take someone who's relatively stronger in quant compared to verbal. So starting verbal score is 82, starting quant score is 76, and then actually let's take a 79, and then starting DI score is 79. So you can really see 79 percentile in verbal, 59 percentile in quant, and 79 percentile in DI. So based on this, what it does is it looks at various ways to get to a 685, and then it recommends a target verbal, a target quant, and a target DI score. So it really just says, it looks at those scores and says, hey, there are about 79 ways to get to a 685. This is the way that it recommends that. And really good option over here, but it's pushing my quant score higher than my verbal score, so I can really pick a slightly different option. I can really say here, how about I aim for an 86 on verbal, an 85 on quant, and then an 81 on data insights, and it really says, okay, it's going to be slightly more challenging because you're aiming for an extremely high score on verbal, which is where the disconnect is. The verbal, there's a big jump when you go from 85 to 86, which is why it preferred that you go from an extremely high score for quant. So we're going to stay over here, and then we're going to move forward over here. So it helps you make good intelligent choices. It also gives you the flexibility if you want to change it, and it educates you that as to what you're doing. You saw it says it's about 50% more challenging. What it says is there's a much higher chance that if you aim for this approach, you may not get to this approach given the best option that it presented to you. Okay. Now at this point, it'll tell you how long will it take for you to get there, and you can really see, depending on your starting strengths, the amount of time that you need is very, very different. On the verbal side, you need just about 23 hours to get there. On the quant side, you need about 100 hours, and then on DI, you need just about 29 hours to get there. And you also see how what we are doing is very, very different. Someone who's at this point over here on the verbal side, they first have to diagnose what their weakness is, because their starting ability is already really high, and then they need to just work on those areas where they need help, and then they need to go towards stage 3, as you can see over here, which is test readiness. On the quant side, you have to start from the very basics, then do cementing, which is stage 2, and then get to test readiness here. So again, depending on the tool, understands your strengths, understands where you need more help, and accordingly uh, customizes your journey. Now, this person's strong in verbal, so let's take and put in their abilities here. Now, I'm just putting the same as a sectional ability. In normally, you'd probably either be stronger in CR or in RC. So that's where you'd put that information there, and then let's get to the quant subsectional scores. So I'm going to just put the same piece here. And again, when it takes those subsectional scores, it gives you a much more precise estimate as to how long you need to get to this score. And then it does the same with DI, where I'm going to put the DS score is slightly lower, GI and TPA and MSR as slightly higher, because this person is not as strong in quant as he is in verbal. Again, you'll see those estimates refined here. I'm going to accept those, and then we're going to move forward here. Again, you'll see these times have been adjusted slightly. The person needs slightly more time in verbal, as well as data insights, and slightly less time in quant based on the subsectional abilities. Then you can put in your time commitments here, and the sequence in which you prefer. If you want to pick a different study sequence, you can pick that as well. Let's kind of stick with a recommended one. You can put in the number of hours per week that you want to spend. Let's say you want to spend 3 hours per day, and then on weekdays, and 5 hours per day on weekends. You can do that. If you want to do it day by day, you can do that as well. Okay, so you can put in a start date, and then with that, it will give you a tentative test date. So you can start on 20th of Feb. You can take the exam in about 6.2 weeks, assuming you're putting in about 25 hours a week, or about 160 hours in total. You accept that, then it explains how your sectional journey is going to be. You're going to start with verbal, you're going to start with CR, you're going to do that for about 3 to 4 days, and the goal is to get to a 90th percentile. Then you're going to move towards RC. The goal is to get to a 95th percentile. And same thing with the quant here. You're going to spend a lot more time in quant, and then the same thing in DI. So when you understand your verbal journey, on the verbal side, you're going to spend 2 to 3 hours in doing master comprehension. You're going to do cementing, diagnose where your weakness is in cementing, and then just do those parts of the course here. The e-GMAT course is really modular. You can go just to those modules where you need help. Do the same thing with RC here, and the same thing with the test readiness. Again, since you're aiming for a high ability, you have about 14 hours to do test readiness just for verbal. On the quant side, you're going to start with the course, and it estimates how long you need to do the course. And because e-GMAT's quant course is space enabled, which means we build a custom course for you. This is an estimate. As you go through the course will automatically adjust its length based on how you're doing. So it'll either make you reduce that time even further, or increase that time if you're not succeeding. Same thing with word problems, same thing with advanced topics and algebra. Okay. So this is a brief overview on how to think about your overall study plan. Hopefully that was helpful. Sanchit, I'm going to talk about the journey tool towards the end. I'm also going to record a video. Hopefully this was useful. And I noticed that a bunch of you have already connected with me on LinkedIn. Thank you so much for that. If you haven't, you can click on this over here and connect with me on LinkedIn. Okay. So with that, let's get to the crux of this webinar, which is how to pre-think assumptions. So just the very high level, we're going to first understand what assumptions are, and then we're going to build a skill which we call as a skill of visualization, and then we're going to solve a few full-length questions while we apply visualization and pre-thinking. If you're doing the CR course, you're going to find this extremely useful. Again, please question in the Q&A pod. That helps me clear the questions or keep them there so that I address them later. Because the pod on the right hand side is a place for my questions and your answers. So I clear this out. If you put your questions here, those questions get lost. Yeah. So if you're doing the CR course, the webinar is going to be really useful for you. If you're doing another course, then you probably should go and continue with that course, because this webinar in that case would be a disruption. Okay. All right. With that, let's kind of talk about how you approach CR questions today. And there are, before we talk about this, I want to talk about what pre-thinking is. And because pre-thinking is a term that is misunderstood in the world of GMAT. In fact, people leverage that term to really say you shouldn't not do pre-thinking. Okay, so pre-thinking is a way to ensure that you comprehend the information that the author provides to you before you start looking at answer choices. The more technical definition is that you think of one potential assumption in about 15 seconds before you look at answer choices. Okay, so pre-thinking is not the same as predicting the answer, because the goal of pre-thinking is to ensure that you comprehend the argument. Now, a skilled pre-thinker is able to do this in about 15 seconds. Most of you, when you start with that notion of pre-thinking, you're going to take about a minute and a half on it, and that's absolutely okay, because you're still learning. When it comes to the GMAT, focus on the process of learning. The more you focus on the process of learning, the better the faster you're going to learn, the faster you're going to be able to improve. Okay. Now, there are two ways in which people solve CR questions today. One is they read the argument, they look at the answer choices, and then they do back and forth between the argument and the answer choices till they reach the final candidate. The second is the pre-thinking approach. I want you to tell me which strategy or which methodology do you use today? Okay, let's get a few more responses. I have about 91 students here in the webinar. Which approach or methodology do you use today? 3, but 47 responses. Let's get to 50, 48, 49, and one more before I broadcast results. All right, 52 broadcast results. So about 56% of you use the back and forth approach, and about 23%, about 49% of you, or 48% give or take, use the pre-thinking approach. Okay, for those of you who are in group one, those who don't use pre-thinking, my goal would be to prove to you why pre-thinking is essential, and to kind of push you towards giving pre-thinking a chance. Those of you who already use pre-thinking, I'm going to give you the tools to get much better at doing pre-thinking. I'm going to tell you what are the checklists that you need to follow through to be able to do it successfully for the hardest questions that are out there. Okay, there were 2 questions here. Again, guys, questions in the Q&A part over here, they go there. Are there any webinars for paid students? Yes, there are. Pal and I conduct coffee sessions for paid students. Next week, we will have at least one cementing session that for CR that be just for paid students. And then the following week, we'll have 2 to 3 sessions for paid students as well. Okay. So now pre-thinking is a method, and if to actually apply any method, you need to have certain foundational skills. And pre-thinking relies on 2 fundamental skills. One of the most important skills is the ability to visualize information. Visualizing information means that when you read something, you actually imagine it happening in front of you. a lot. Okay, guys, questions in the Q&A pod. Please copy and put those questions in the Q&A pod. 3, 2, and 1. I'm going to clear those questions. Okay. So when you read a complex statement and you visualize it in front of you, what you're really doing is you're translating it, putting it into words, and that I think, and numbers as well, and that I think is extremely powerful when it comes to understanding that complex statement here. We visualize the conclusion, we visualize the logical structure, we also visualize the answer choices. People who don't do these three things falter on questions despite doing 70 to 80% of all the work. If you visualize the conclusion, visualize the answer choices, you're going to find answering questions becomes not only a lot easier, but also a lot faster. The second thing is we're going to focus on building that logical structure. We're going to link the conclusion with the facts that the author uses or the premises that the author uses to support the conclusion. And once we have this, that's when we're going to formulate the falsification question, which is the foundation of pre-thinking. Now, if you visualize information, then as humans, we are such skilled thinkers that essentially finding assumptions comes very naturally to us. And I'm going to prove this point with a very simple argument. It's an argument that you guys visualize day in and day out. It's something that's very easy for you to visualize because it's about a context that you think about a lot. Okay, so I'm going to give you an argument. I'm going to give you about 60 seconds. I want you to tell me, what does the author assume in this argument? Now, I'm going to remove broadcast results. So type your answers in, press enter on the right-hand part over here, which is the generic short answer question. When you do that, I will actually get them. You won't see it, but the system will record your responses. And once I have about 12 responses live, I'm going to broadcast results. Is the audio good? You should be able to hear me clearly from my side. I'm showing the audio is coming through loud and clear. Perfect. Is the audio good? Yes, correct. Okay. With that, let me clear those answers. And here's the argument. You guys have about 60 seconds to tell me, what does the author assume in this argument? All right, I have about 15 responses. Let me broadcast results. You guys can see that. And you can really see most of you have gotten this. This is correct. So that's really, really good. Most of you have already said, hey, to get into an Ivy League school, you need a score higher than 500. That's a bare minimum. Okay. So that's absolutely correct. Okay. So what does the author do over here? He gives you a fact or a data point, says, hey, Joe scored 500 on the GMAT. And based on this fact, he makes a prediction or a claim which says that he won't get admission in an Ivy League college. And while making that prediction, he makes that assumption that a score of 500 on the GMAT for someone like Joe, and someone like Joe is really important. Why? Because the author says Joe will not get admission. The author is not saying that the Prince of Saudi Arabia won't get admission. The author says Joe will not get admission in an Ivy League college. So while doing that, he makes an assumption that a score of 500 on the GMAT for someone like Joe is unacceptable to Ivy League college. Now, with that, I want you to tell me, what's the definition of an assumption? I want you to type it out. Okay, good answers. New information must be to really like that answer. Statement that is taken for granted. Thing that is accepted as true as a certain to happen without proof. Okay. Condition that must be true, else author's conclusion breaks. That's a good one as well. Okay, lots of good answers. That is really true. Unwritten premise that must be true for the conclusion to be valid. Good answers. Lots and lots of good answers. I'm gonna actually leave you with this, and I, for the purposes of it, your understanding is good, is really good for most of you. Um, but I want you to just take this statement as the one that we are going to use over here, because I'm going to ask you to recite this again and again as we solve questions. An assumption is an unstated idea that must be true for the conclusion to be valid. So essentially, there are two attributes to assumption. One is that it's unstated or non-inferable from the information, from the factual part of the argument. And the second is that it satisfies that must be true conclusion condition. And this is essentially, the core definition of an assumption. If you understand this, if you know this definition in and out, then you can answer every question that the test can throw at you, or the test will throw at you, as long as you visualize the information that's given to you. Okay. There are two characteristics of the correct assumption. One is that it provides new information, which means that you shouldn't be able to infer the information in the answer choice from the argument. About 3% of all questions, test that. Very few questions test that, and they're usually easier. But 97% of questions test the must be true part, and these questions get more and more challenging. So the must be true aspect is kind of the aspect that most of us need to worry about. Okay, but it's really important to know the other aspect with regards to new information as well. Now at e-GMAT, we are big on visualizing information. So if you want to visualize the assumption, let's kind of think of this entire argument as this house, where the conclusion is this roof, and you have three supporting pillars that are supporting this conclusion. Essentially, these pillars keep this roof to be upright. Now, we've got to figure out which of these pillars is an assumption, because all of these pillars are supporting statements or premises, as we call them, but not all of them are assumptions. And to do that, we're going to number them as 1, 2, and 3. We remove pillar 1, and the roof still stays upright, which means that pillar 1 is not an assumption. It was definitely a strengthener. It made the roof stronger, but it's not an assumption. We remove pillar 3. The roof still stays upright. Again, a strengthener, but not an assumption. We kind of bring pillars 1 and 3 back. We remove pillar 2, and the roof caves in. Because the roof caved in despite the presence of pillars 1 and 3, pillar 2 is an assumption. It's necessary information that must be true for the conclusion to remain valid, or in other words, the conclusion can be broken if once you remove the assumption. Okay, that's kind of the definition of an essential pillar. Now remember this, because or remember this visualization, because as we get to questions where you have complex answer choices, you're going to see multiple answer choices that support the conclusion. Only one of them is going to satisfy that must be true condition, or would be the essential pillar, or would be the correct answer. Okay. So in simple words, what it means, what must be true means is that if the information provided by assumption is not true, then the conclusion can no longer hold true, which kind of leads to the very definition of what an assumption is. Okay. So let's kind of apply this definition to enhance our understanding on the answer choice. So what does falsifying the conclusion mean? I'm going to clear the answer this over here. Or in what scenario can my conclusion break down? If my conclusion will break down if Joe gets admission into an Ivy League school with that score of 500. Everyone's clear? If this happens, then my conclusion breaks down, correct? Okay, perfect. Now, how do we figure out, because in an actual argument, you have multiple answer choices. How do you figure out whether an answer choice is correct? So this is the answer choice that we said is the correct answer. And let's kind of see, is that a must be true? Does it satisfy a must be true condition? Okay. So in other words, when we say will it satisfy a must be true condition, the question that we are asking is that will Joe get admission, which is the conclusion breakdown criteria, if this particular statement is no longer true. Now, listen to this carefully. When you say that a certain statement is no longer true, or no longer necessarily true, what you're also saying is that its negated instance is necessarily true. And I'm going to explain this, which means when you say this statement is not must be true, what you're really saying is that this statement, a score of 500 for someone like Joe is acceptable to Ivy League colleges. Now, when this statement becomes true, what happens to our conclusion? Does it break down? Absolutely. Why? Because if a score of 500 becomes acceptable to Ivy League colleges for someone like Joe, then I, as an author, cannot say with 100% certainty that Joe will not get admission to Ivy League colleges. So that's kind of your negation test here. Now, some of you may be asked, hey, Rajat, how can you say that if a statement is not true, then its negated instance actually becomes true? That's kind of basic inference. When you say, let's take a statement, Harvard has the best MBA program. When you say this statement is not true, what you're essentially saying is that Harvard does not have the best MBA program, or an MBA program that is just as good or even better than Harvard exists. Can you see? When you said this statement is not necessarily true, then what you're essentially saying is that this is true. Can you see that? Yes, no? Okay, so when you say a statement is not must be true, what you're really saying is I am 100% certain that its negated instance is true. Let's take another example. John runs faster than David. When you say that's not necessarily true, what you're automatically saying is that, I have 100% confirmation that John does not run faster than David, or David can be just as fast, or in fact even faster than John. Again, when you say when you say a statement is not true, you can very easily say you're saying its negated instance is true. Okay, so this is the notion of must be true, which means that if an answer choice is the correct assumption, then the conclusion will break down in the presence of that negated version of this answer choice. In other words, if a pillar is an essential pillar, you remove that pillar, your roof is going to cave in. Kind of what the definition of an essential pillar is. Is that clear? Okay. Let's kind of look at the other side of it as well. If an answer choice is the incorrect answer choice, which means it doesn't satisfy the must be true condition, then your conclusion is not going to break down in the presence of the negated instance of that answer choice. Let's take another example. A score of 500 on the GMAT is not a good score. Let's kind of look at this and ask ourselves, is that a must be true? So to do that, let's kind of, again, ask the same question. Is this must be true? Let's say it's not. So if this statement is not true, then a score of 500 becomes a good score. So if a score of 500 becomes a good score, then does my conclusion break down? Absolutely not. Why? Because when you read the argument is not predicated or dependent on whether you call the score a good, bad, an excellent score. The logic of the argument is Joe scored a certain number, and because he scored a certain number, he's not going to get into an Ivy League college. In other words, you can replace 500 by 700. He will still not get into an Ivy League college. Okay. Remember, those who are talking about profile, there's nothing in the argument about profile. You do not bring your own information into this. By the way, the next choice that we're going to really talk about is something which alludes to this. The quality of an applicant's essay does not play a significant role in deciding whether he gets into an Ivy League college. You're going to get this. I'm going to explain this about 7 times in this session. So you're going to get this. I understand some of you won't get it, but about 70-75% of you should have gotten it. So this is an option that we have to evaluate. Is that a must be true? Is that an assumption? The quality of an applicant's essays does not play, which means, hey, essays are not important, do not play a significant role in deciding whether an applicant gets into an Ivy League. Is it required that this condition be true, that essays don't play a 30-40% role? So let's look at this and ask ourselves, is that must be, bring in my arrow here. Is this must be true? Which means, does my conclusion break down if its negated instance becomes true, which means that the quality of an applicant essay does play a significant role in deciding, or which means the essays become important. Now, if the essays become important, then does my conclusion break down? Does Joe get admission into an Ivy League college? The answer is no, not really. Why? Because if Joe doesn't get a prerequisite score, then even though he may have excellent essays, he will still not get into an Ivy League college as long as he doesn't meet the threshold, right? For those of you, how many of you are Indians? How many of you are from India? So in India, you see this where if you do not have a certain minimum threshold qualification criteria, you may have a bunch of other excellent things, you still don't get considered for it. This kind of is a very similar scenario. What the author is saying is that Joe doesn't meet a minimum criteria required on the GMAT for the Ivy League schools. Because he doesn't meet that minimum criteria required, these other things which he may have, they don't even play a role. Okay. Again, in the answer choices, the author will try and bring in information that may seem relevant to you, but when you look at the logic of the argument, it would not be relevant. And that's where, if you focus on the pre-thinking process, you're going to find that you'd be able to reject those answer choices through the pre-thinking process fairly easily. Okay. The skills that we're going to focus on. The first thing is we're going to visualize information in our own words, whether it's the conclusion or the answer choices. The second, we're going to link information, which is where we call as building the logical structure. And the third is that we're going to formulate this thing called the falsification question, which I'm going to talk about in the next few minutes. Just just for you to keep in mind, if you negate the correct answer, if you negate the correct assumption, you're going to find that the negation breaks my conclusion. If you negate the incorrect assumption, what you're going to find is the conclusion still holds true in the presence of the negated version of for the incorrect answer choice. That's kind of the very definition of what an assumption is. Why? All of this comes from the very definition of an assumption, where it's an unstated idea that must be true for the conclusion to hold true. Okay, this was a brief introduction to what an assumption was, what an assumption is. We are now going to build on this information to solve challenging questions. This is where we're going to learn pre-thinking. This is where we're going to learn visualization and logical structure. So one of the things that I like doing is what I'm going to really do is I'm going to actually make you do most of the work, because I don't like to do the work. So I'm going to make you solve questions, and I'm going to explain questions. Does that work? Perfect. That way you learn more as well. Okay. Shashank has a question. He says the webinar is already feeling useful. Can we get mailers for these webinar sessions? Shashank, everyone gets an email. You should have gotten an email. If you haven't, then please let us know, because we do send out mailers 4 or 5 days in advance. So how many of you registered through an email over here? Just a yes, no poll. If you got an email, you can just say yes. Yeah. A few more people. Yeah. So yeah, everyone gets an email. If you don't, please let us know. Okay. So this is the process that we're going to follow. I'm going to give you an argument over here. And I'm going to give you about 2 minutes. This is going to be a bare bones argument here. No answer choices. All you have to do is read the argument, find the conclusion, tell me what does the author assume here. That's it. Okay. Then we're going to look at your pre-thinking, and then I'm going to go through my process of pre-thinking, my thought process, and we're going to then evaluate a couple of submissions if necessary. Okay. For this to work, I want you guys to participate. One of the big things that I tell people is, this is what I call as a zero risk environment. You are here, you're spending your time with me. The best way to get the most out of this webinar is if you participate. If you don't participate, you don't know whether your thinking is right or wrong. So please participate, put your answers in. It helps me understand how you as a group are thinking, and then it helps me modulate what I do. Okay. Get a pen and paper. Here is the argument. I'm going to remove broadcast results. I'm going to mute myself. 3, 2, and 1. Good luck, guys. All right, guys, last 15 seconds. Get those answers in. Tell us, what does the author assume here? Five. Come on, type your answers and press enter. 4, 3, 2, and 1. When a broadcast results. So here you can see how people have answered. Um, more emphasis on research means less student learning. Reward emphasis leads to directly affects quality. Tenured professors do not focus on study because they get better reward for research. Contractual faculty do not teach seriously as the permanent ones. This, I think, is opposite of what the research result says. Okay, reward systems are the main reasons for enhanced learning given by tenured professors. Actually, tenured professors don't do enhanced learning as per the argument. So again, you can see same argument, how different people have come up with different assumptions for this particular argument. Now let's look at how I'm going to approach this. Okay, the first thing we're going to do is focus just on what the author is trying to prove from this argument, which is figure out what the conclusion is. We're going to visualize this. We're going to assign numbers to it. That's, for me, works as one of the best ways of visualizing. Now, when I talk about numbers, I'm not going to do complex math. This is not about math. In fact, even math for me is about building logical relationships. So this is not math. This is purely visualizing information out there by putting numbers. Okay. The benefit of putting numbers is that, defining right versus wrong becomes a lot easier. Then we're going to really look at what are those numbers based on, what is that conclusion based on, and then finally we're going to ask this pre-thinking question, and as we do that, assumptions jump out at us. Okay. Now, what's the overall process of this pre-thinking? The process of pre-thinking is built around that very definition of assumption, where an assumption is an unstated idea that is required or that must be true for the conclusion to hold valid, or to be valid. In other words, without an assumption, a conclusion will break down. So what this means, if you were to draw an inference from this, is that assumption is built around those scenarios in which the conclusion breaks down. So if you were to visualize that house argument again, where you're building, you have this roof and you're putting these pillars. If you want to figure out where to put pillars in the house, figure out where the roof's caving in. You do the architectural design and see where the roof's caving in. You put a pillar and that prevents the roof from caving in. In the same way, if you have to figure out where the assumptions are, figure out how can you break the conclusion. And essentially, an assumption simply is a statement that says that such a scenario that breaks that conclusion is not possible. Okay. Find out the scenarios that break the conclusion. That's all that you have to do. Okay. This is the second thing that I'm going to ask you to write down, because again, regardless of the kind of argument, whether it's causal, predictive, whether it, this question remains the same. Under what circumstances or situations, given the information in the argument, will the conclusion break down? This question will remain the same. There are just two fill in the blanks here, and based on the question, we're going to fill them out. This is 1, which is the facts given in the argument, and this is 2, which is my conclusion breakdown criteria. Write this down, and we're going to apply this again and again. And this is going to be true even for TPA. Okay. So this is the argument. The first thing is we've got to figure out which statement is my main conclusion. So I'm going to put in a poll question here. I want you to tell me which statement is my main conclusion. Remove broadcast results. Here are the 3 statements. Tell me which statement is the main conclusion. You've read this argument, so this should be fairly quick. Want at least 50 responses. I have 20, 25, 32, 41, 44, 45. Want 50 responses. Which statement is the main conclusion? 49, 54, 55. Let me end the poll. Broadcast results. You can see 43% of you are correct. Statement 2 is indeed the main conclusion. Over here, a bunch of you think statement 3 is the main conclusion. Many of you think statement 1 is the main conclusion. Statement 2 is the correct answer. Okay. Let's kind of talk about why statement 2 is the main conclusion, and then I'm going to tell you why statement 1 is not the main conclusion. In an argument, the main conclusion is always by the author of the argument, which is the person who has written the argument. That's one piece. The second piece is the main conclusion is what the author wants you to believe, or what the author wants as an outcome of this argument. A lot of people think statement 1 is the main conclusion. Why? Because it has this word concludes. Okay, so sure, I'd mute myself. So now, who concludes over here in this case? Who this concludes is it the author? It's the paper. This conclusion is not made by the author. Okay, look at the word before. It's the research paper, not the author of the argument. Okay, so when you see the a recently published paper concludes that blah 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 blah, it's the paper that has made this conclusion. Okay, not the author. So this is the conclusion is by the paper, not by the author, and statement 1 cannot be the main conclusion. In fact, statement 1 is a fact that the author tries to explain. Okay. Statement 2 is what the author says. It says that clearly the difference between professors in the tenure system and other full-time lecturers has to do with the reward system for the former. Okay. This is what the author is saying. I'm trying to explain the difference between why this difference exists. And he says it's a reward system. And then statement 3 is written to actually strengthen or prove statement 2 or support statement 2, where the author says the criterion for rewarding tenured faculty places a greater emphasis on research than on teaching. Because statement 3 is written to make statement 2 more believable. Statement 3 is a premise, statement 2 is the main conclusion. Those who chose either statement 1 or statement 3 as the main conclusion, is that clear to you guys? Okay. Is that clear? I want to see a few more yeses, please. Again, the main conclusion is always by the author of the argument, and it's the idea that the author wants to promote. Yeah, I can explain statement 3 again. So why is statement 3 written? Does statement 3 support statement 2? So I'm going to really just say, type it out. Does 2 or which one's true? Does 3 support 2 or ABC test? It's the same one, yes. 3 is not an assumption. An assumption is an unstated idea. Remember, this one's a stated idea. 3 is a premise. Since 3 supports 2, which means 3 is written to make 2 more believable. So 3 cannot be the central idea, right? If 3 is written to support something else, then that something else could be the central idea of the argument. Definitely not 3. What is ABC test? ABC test is a test that we teach at e-GMAT, where we say if B is written to support C, then C is the main conclusion. If C is written to support B, then B is the main conclusion. So that's kind of what you ask yourself. Okay. It's in the premise and conclusion file. It's, I think, file number 2, if memory serves me right. Is that clear to everyone now? Okay, now I have another question here. Whose reward system does statement 3 talk about? Okay. You have 4 options here. I'm going to mute. I'm looking for 50 responses again. I have 45, 46, 49. 51, 52. Let me end the poll. Broadcast results. But 77% of you got it right. It's just tenured faculty or only tenured faculty. You can see 20% of you think both of them. So, and this is where comprehending information is really, really important here, and visualizing information. The criterion for rewarding tenured faculty, let's just do over here, tenured faculty, typically places a greater emphasis, greater is a comparative word, on research versus than on teaching. What it's really saying is that maybe let's kind of look at, translate the word greater into numbers as 70% emphasis on research and 30% emphasis on teaching. That's all it's saying, but it's only for tenured faculty. We don't know anything about full-time lecturers over here. Is that clear to everyone? Okay. Can you really see if you go down, if you slow down, life becomes a lot easier here? Okay. So let's kind of visualize this conclusion here. The conclusion is the difference between professors in the tenured system and other full-time lecturers has to do with the reward system for the former. Former is the professors here. Okay. So what this is saying is that, hey, tenured professors only cause significant improvement for 40% of the students, whereas full-time lecturers help 70% of the students improve significantly. And the author is blaming the reward system. Okay, the reward system. Why is this not selected? Hold on. The reward system, my bad, for these guys over here. Okay. All right. So that's the main conclusion. Statement number 3 we already talked about is the supporting statement. Statement number 2 is the context that also supports the main conclusion. The conclusion is built on it. So in many ways, that's a premise as well. So now let's ask our pre-thinking question. This was the general template. Under what circumstances, given the facts in the argument, will the conclusion break down? This has two parts, one here and two over here. And we're going to translate these over here. So under what circumstances, this is 2, this was 1, will the reward system not be responsible? So 2 is translated to 2 over here. Can you see how 2 is translated to 2 here? Conclusion breakdown means reward system not be responsible for the difference in performance. See the translation, please? How conclusion breakdown is translated to reward system not be responsible. Right? Okay, I'm looking for a yes, no response. Can you see the translation of this as this over here? Okay. Given that, now we have to translate facts in the argument. So this led to this. Facts in the argument lead to this. Full-time lecturers do a much better job than professors do. Reward system for professors has a much better, a higher emphasis on research, 70% on research and 30% on teaching. Okay. So under what circumstances can we not blame the reward system given these facts? Let's look at this. We cannot blame the reward system if non-tenured professors have an identical reward system, correct? If the other entity also has the same reward system, yes, then we can't blame it. We cannot blame the reward system if a survey is conducted and most tenured professors say, hey, we don't care about what the reward system is. That's not what governs our actions, right? Can you see in both these cases, we cannot blame the reward system? Can you see that? We can also not blame the reward system if students who come to tenured professors are already so skilled that there isn't as much scope to improve their learning ability. Okay. In either case, we won't blame the reward system. Remember, the facts in the argument are still true. We are not saying that, hey, professors do just as good a job as lecturers. What we are really saying is, hey, we agree that professors don't do just as good a job. It's just that you can't blame the reward system for it. Now, if these scenarios break my conclusion down, then my assumptions are these scenarios are not possible. Non-tenured faculty cannot have an identical reward system, and most tenured professors should care about the reward system. Right? And you can really see this is very, very different from the kind of assumption that some of you came up with, which is that, hey, research does not help in with regards to teaching or learning. That's not a correct assumption. Research could help with teaching or learning. That's there. It's just that, hey, if they spend hours doing research and if it has a minuscule amount of improvement in with regards to teaching and learning, then that is not the correct assumption. What you can also really see is if you go through it as a process and if you focus on breaking the conclusion, assumptions jump out at you. Okay. And that's why this method works beautifully. Now, how many of you are concerned about timing? How many of you are really saying, man, this worries me? Actually, let me just put in a yes, no poll here. Much better. Don't write your answers, and I'm going to put in a yes, no poll here because the data is usually more fascinating. But 85% of you are concerned about timing. Okay. But 13% of you are not. Let me tell you a few things here. Okay. The first thing, since the year 2020, we've delivered 60% of all success on GMAT Club. In other words, 8 other GMAT Club partners together combined have delivered about 40% of all 700 plus scores reported. We at e-GMAT have accounted for 60%. If pre-thinking weren't true, pre-thinking is an e-GMAT term, we invented it, then this would not be true. Okay. When you look at significant verbal improvement, that percentage actually becomes even higher. Okay. Also, when you look at 5-star reviews, this very same thing holds true. We've actually more 5-star reviews than everyone else combined. Okay. So these methods work. They work beautifully. The second thing, how many of you think, hey, you struggle on the GMAT because you have timing issues? Or in other words, what you're really saying is you'd be able to get to your target GMAT score if you got 5 to 7 more minutes on the GMAT. Let me just put in a yes no poll question again. How many of you think that if you got 5 more minutes in every section, quant, verbal, or DI, you'd be able to get to your target GMAT score? Come on, this is an important question. I only have 35 responses. My question is, if I gave you 5 more minutes in each section, which is 50 minutes in quant, 50 minutes in verbal, 50 minutes in DI, you'd be able to get to your target GMAT score. 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. We end the poll. Got 46 responses. 57% of you think if you got 50 minutes per section, you'd be able to get to your target GMAT score. Okay, I'm going to put in another yes no question here. Let me just bring another yes no poll. Bear with me. Here is another yes no poll, which is, are you within 20 points of your target GMAT score? Come on, the same 46 responses, or 46 students who responded to the first one. I want you to tell me. 3, I have 36 responses, the 40 responses. Are you within 20 points of your target GMAT score? Third, 44, 45. Let me end the poll and broadcast. If you're not within 20 points of your target GMAT score, then those 5 minutes won't help you. Even if you are within 20 points of your target GMAT score, those 5 people who said yes, half of you will benefit from those 5 minutes. The other half will probably have an ability issue. And I'm going to prove this to you. A lot of people think they have timing issues on the GMAT. 97-98% of those folks have ability issues, which manifest themselves into timing issues. Why do you take longer to solve a question? When questions on which you take longer, don't you do a lot of back and forth? You go back to the argument, come back to the answer choices, go back to the argument, come back to the answer choices. Right? Is that a timing issue? Is that a timing issue? Absolutely not. That's an ability issue. That's a skill issue that manifests itself as a timing issue. Because the question is not clear in your head. That's not a timing issue. In the very way that, fever is never an illness. Fever is an indication of what? When you have fever, what is it an indication of? What's fever an indication of? Not low immunity. It's an indication of infection, a pathogen, yes. Okay, fever actually helps you fight pathogens, right? Fever by itself is not an illness by itself. Okay, in the same way, timing is not a problem. It's an indication of lack of a certain skill. Tips for quickly reading and comprehending passages: slow down, Soma. Slow down. The slower you go, the faster you would be answering questions. If you attended my RC session last week, you would have concluded that. If by the end of this webinar, you're going to conclude that. The slower you go, the faster you'd be able to answer questions. Okay. And this is something that you really see. How many of you have heard experts tell you, I'm going to teach you speed reading, which will help you answer questions quickly? How many of you have heard experts tell you that? Speed reading, those hidden techniques that only I know, no one else knows. I'm going to teach you tricks. No? Then why are you talking about speed reading or speed over here? There are no tricks that work on the GMAT. GMAT's such a beautifully designed test. It's a test of logic. Now, when it comes to pre-thinking, you're going to go through a certain journey. Okay. This is the journey that you're going to go through. So here on the y-axis, you have accuracy. The higher you go, the more accurate you become. Okay. And on the x-axis, you have time to answer questions. All right. So let's say you're someone who's starting at this point number 1 here. The first time you start doing pre-thinking, 2 things are going to happen. Your time to answer questions is going to go up. Your accuracy is going to go up. You can see we're going in this direction. As you go from towards the right on the x-axis, your time to answer questions, that time goes up. As you go up on the vertical side, your accuracy goes up. And at this point over here, you're going to ask yourself, you're going to be like this guy over here. Why the hell am I doing pre-thinking? How many of you have experienced this? Okay. Everyone will do this. If you haven't experienced this, and you're not doing something right. Okay. Why is this? What is this a symptom of? When something like this happens, what is this an indication of? You're not accustomed yet, absolutely. What else does it tell you? That you're learning something new. Your brain's trying to make those neural connections. Okay. If you don't get more things right, and if you don't take longer, then you're not learning something new. Whether it's not just about the GMAT. You try and learn a new shot in badminton, you'll have to slow down, and you're gonna get more of those shots on the other side of the court. That's something that's gonna happen. Why? Because you're building new muscles, because you're also building new neurological connections in your brain. When you learn to code a certain way, when you learn to do math a certain way, you're gonna have to slow down. Again, for the very same reason. Does that make sense? Have you guys experienced this part? Have you guys learned something in the last 1 year where you've experienced this? That's bound to happen. Now, for those of you who persist with this, who focus on visualization, who continue to do this is what's going to happen. Your accuracy is going to continue to go up. Remember, we're going to go further up on y-axis, but your time to answer questions is going to come down. Why would that happen? Because the constructs which are there in conclusion, in answer choices, you're going to start seeing a repetition of those constructs, and because your brain's already made those connections, you're going to find that, hey, visualizing them becomes a lot easier. You're able to see those traps much more easily in answer choices, because the visualization happens a lot easier. Now, this is only going to happen if, as you go from 1 to 2, you are focused on learning. And for those of you who are focused on just going from one question to the other, you're not going to experience that. But those who are focused on learning will experience that. Okay. And at that point, this is where what we call as hysteresis of pre-thinking. You're going to achieve that hysteresis where once you reach point number 3, you are never going to give up on pre-thinking. Why? Because you've achieved higher accuracy, you've reduced your time to answer questions. And as you continue to do that, you're going to learn more and more constructs. Your accuracy is going to go further up. Your time to answer questions is going to go further down. Okay. Does that make sense? And Sanket, yes, we're going to make the recording available. Okay. Sanchit, is Sanchit here? Sanchit asked a question early on in the webinar, the journey tool. Okay. So as one of our students who went to booth, he basically was stuck at 700 because he wasn't doing pre-thinking. Then he started doing pre-thinking. Within 15 years, he improved from a 35th percentile in CR to a 97th percentile. His GMAT score improved from a 700 to a 770. And he really says, answer CR questions as if there are no answer choices. Pre-thinking is a game changer. When it gets to those 700 level questions, you have to do it. Why? Because it helps you focus on the logic, and it ensures that you don't deviate from key argument or trap or auto scope answer choices. If you click on this here, you could be able to actually download his ESR, and you can see how his CR ability has improved. Okay. As another student who scored a 715 or 99 percentile on the focus edition, he says, pre-thinking is necessary when it comes to hard questions. It helps you reject incorrect answer choices with a high degree of confidence. Okay. Bottom line, if you do not take longer to solve questions initially, then you're not learning something new. Then you're not going to see that disproportionate improvement. Okay. With that, we're going to focus on the process of pre-thinking through another example. This will seem like a really simple argument, and it truly is a very simple argument, but the answer choices here are confusing. There are 4 strengtheners in the answer choices and only 1 assumption. And if you don't focus on the must be true aspect of assumption, you're going to falter here. So I'm going to actually give you the poll question here. Where is it? Yeah. Here is the poll question, and here is the argument. I'm going to give you about 3 minutes to answer questions. So good luck, guys. All right, you guys have another 15 seconds. Get those answers in. 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. We end the poll. We broadcast the results. This is how you guys did. That's actually a fairly surprising result for me when I look at this today. Choices B, D, and E are really popular. Now, in the past, when I have hosted this webinar, choices B and E have been really popular. It's, I think, one of the very few instances where choice D has been popular. So that's really, really interesting for me. Let's kind of go through this. By the way, how did you guys find this question? How was it? Okay, good. Difficult difference medium. Okay, this is a 700 level question. Let me just be very clear. Okay, let's kind of look at this here. So let's understand what's the conclusion in this case. But before we go there, Guion has asked this question. I'm still working through the verbal course, just finished the assumption section. Would the pre-thinking approach work for all assumption or argument family questions, essentially strength and weaken and paradox? The answer is yes, it will. Actually, evaluate, strengthen, weaken, logically completes, and in fact, even boldface. Pre-thinking approach works for all of them. Now, when it comes to evaluate, you're going to see a slight adaptation of this. When it comes to strengthen and weaken, the approach would remain more or less the same. The pre-thinking question by itself would change, but the core, which is visualizing information and building that logical structure, would remain the same. It's just you're going to ask a slightly different pre-thinking question. In boldface, the approach is going to change as well. But yes, the overall, the pre-thinking would be applied for all of those question types. And the course will teach you that. I'm going to explain every answer choice. Okay, don't worry. Alejandro, this is a 700 level question. So what's the conclusion here? The conclusion here is that the toll increase will increase the annual revenue generated by at least 50%. In other words, if last year the annual revenue was $1 million, this year the annual revenue would be, let's say, $1.6 million. All right, that's kind of what we are saying over here. Is that clear? Is that clear? That's what we are saying. Now, how do we estimate annual revenue? The argument's right up there. Given this argument, how do we estimate annual revenue? Number of miles traveled times, miles times price, right? Those of you talking about trips, where do you see trips in this argument? Do you see trips in the argument at all? Do you see drivers in this argument at all? It wasn't there in the argument. It was there in the answer choices. Right? So annual revenue is toll per mile multiplied by total number of toll miles. Right? Fairly simple over here. So we're going to ask this entire question. Under what circumstances, given the facts in the argument, will the conclusion break down? 1 and 2. Okay. Now, under what circumstances would the revenue not increase by 50%? This is your 2 conclusion breakdown criteria, provided that toll per mile has been increased by 50%. This is your 1 over here. Okay. So what we know over here, and you guys are already typing the answer, that's nice for me. We know that toll per mile has gone up by 50%. Under what circumstances will this not go up by 50%? The only way is if this goes down. We're going to look at every answer choice. Don't worry about the answer choice that you chose. I'm going to explain why the incorrect ones are incorrect. Let's just stay with the argument. Remember, pre-thinking is done before you read the answer choices. Is this clear to everyone? Is this clear to everyone? Is this simple? Is this simple? Yes, no? Very, very simple, right? That's all that we need to do. Okay. So the only way in which my conclusion breaks down is the total number of miles decreases, and the assumption is the total number of miles does not decrease. Okay. Let's look at choice B. Arthur has a question. Which pre-thinking do you read the question first? Yeah, you've got to figure out it's an assumption question. I do read that question first before I do pre-thinking. Great question over there, Arthur. Okay, choice B says the total number of trips made on the toll highway per year will not decrease from its current level. So what it's saying is if last year we made 1,000 trips, this year that number will not go to 950. Okay. The question that what's the definition of an assumption? Remember, we did the definition of an assumption. What is the definition of an assumption? It is an unstated idea that must be true for the conclusion to hold valid. Now, if the total number of trips reduces to 950, does it necessarily mean that the total number of miles traveled on toll highways will decrease? What can compensate for fewer trips? What can compensate for fewer trips? Longer trips, right? So is this a must be true? Is that a must be true? Absolutely not. It's an excellent strengthener. It is that additional pillar, remember, that we talked about with the roof over there, but it's not the essential pillar. It makes my conclusion stronger, but it's not the must be true option. Do you now understand what, first of all, choice B, people who chose choice B, do you understand why this is wrong? Do you now have a better understanding of must be true? Okay. The correct answer is choice E. Choice E talks about the total distance traveled. Okay. And if the total distance traveled decreases, then essentially the total number of miles will go down, which means my revenue will not go up by 50%. Okay. Let's look at choice C. Choice C talks about the average length of the trip made on a toll highway. If that decreases, what can compensate for shorter trips? What can compensate for shorter trips? If last year the average length of the trip was 20 miles, now it's 18 miles, more trips can compensate. Again, not must be true. Again, a strengthener, but not a must be true. Okay. Choice D. If the number of drivers who consistently avoid highway will increase, let's say last year, let's look at D for Delta. Last year, 1,000 drivers avoided. This year, that number is 1,100. Does it mean that the total distance traveled would go down? What could compensate for fewer drivers on the toll highway? What could compensate for fewer drivers? Both B and C, longer trips and more trips by people who are going there. Right? Both choices B and C could compensate. If the remaining people could do more trips, the remaining people could also do longer trips. The remaining people could do both longer and more trips. Again, choice D, D for Delta, is not a must be true. Now, to what degree does this question enhance your clarity of MBT or must be true? Can you really see just through this one question? We did about 4 to 5 case studies. What's your takeaway, in other words, from this particular question? What is your takeaway? What's your takeaway? How are you gonna, those of you who got this wrong, how are you gonna change your behavior? How are you gonna ensure that you do not make this mistake? Ability to visualize answer choices. Good. Thank you. Applicability of must be true. Perfect. Easy but confusing. Sanket says, can we say D is irrelevant as there's no mention of secondary highway? Sanket, we can't say that D is irrelevant. The word irrelevant is used for an option that has no impact on the conclusion. Okay. Choice D does have an impact on the conclusion. Okay. A choice D, as I said, is a strengthener, so it does have an impact. So I won't call it irrelevant here. I can actually formulate a version of choice D if I spend some time, which will make it a correct answer choice. Okay, so so that's there. So it's not irrelevant here. So great question. An irrelevant answer choice by definition is something that has no impact on the conclusion. Here it has an impact. It's just that it doesn't have an impact enough to be a must be true answer choice. All right. How are we doing so far? Are we learning things? Best. Okay, good. 4 RCs in the focus edition. All right. e-GMAT, is this helping you? Those of you who are paid students? Okay. I want to see better grades on your course now. Okay, now we're going to do a two-part analysis question. Two-part analysis questions are slightly more tricky. They build on a complete understanding of assumption and RC. So I'm going to try this out here, and I think even if you get it wrong, don't take it personally, because again, remember, you are here to learn. Okay. So in a two-part analysis question, what happens is you're given an argument, and then from that argument, in this one, you're going to the author is going to give you 6 answer choices, and is going to ask you which one of these is an assumption, which one of these is a strengthener that strengthens that assumption. So it's a convoluted question. Okay. So here is the question here. Here is the question. Stem over here, and you can really see, identify an assumption required by the journalist's argument and a fact that, if true, would most strongly support the required assumption. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave you with this, and here are the answer choices so that you have that. So these are the same 6 answer choices. In the first question, you've got to choose which of these answer choices is an assumption on which the argument depends. And then I'm going to give you 2.5 minutes to select that. Then I'm going to give you another poll question where you can select the answer choice which most strongly supports that assumption. Okay. So 2.5 minutes for this, and then 1.5 minutes for that particular one. Okay. So good luck, guys. I'm going to mute myself now. All right, 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. I'm going to end the poll. And I'm going to broadcast the results. This was, which of the statements did you think was an assumption? And you can really see choice F, or number 6, as they call it now, is the most popular option here. Choice number 3 is also a pretty popular option. Now I'm going to give you another poll here, which is 27-1, 27-2 is the other poll. Now, which of these is the strengthener? Now, remember, the answer choices is the same. You cannot choose the same answer choice that you chose for as an assumption. Okay, you have to choose an option other than that you chose as an assumption. You guys have 90 seconds for this. Good luck, guys. All right, guys, get those answers in. 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. I'm going to end the poll and broadcast results. And here you can see again, choice C was the most popular answer choice. But then choice D, or number 4, is also pretty popular. Number 5 is also pretty popular. And number 3 is also somewhat popular. So how was this question? And again, on the GMAT, you get points only if you get both these options correct. Tricky, yes. It gets more tricky. Confusing, yes, to be honest, absolutely. It is confusing. And one thing you're going to really see is the fundamental skills that are used here are the same skills that you learn in assumption. It's just a slightly more advanced application of this. Now, before we go through this, I'm going to just go through the question stem so that you understand this, because the question stem is a bit atypical. Okay, again, 700 level question. Absolutely. Okay, so we have to identify an assumption over here. I'm going to highlight that. We have to identify an assumption required by the journalist's arguments. Okay, that part's very, very standard. So this is a fairly standard assumption question. And a fact that, if true, would most strongly support the assumption. So when you say most strongly support the assumption, what you're really saying is the assumption now becomes a conclusion, and this additional piece of information makes that conclusion stronger. Okay, and you had to make 2 selections, and you say, okay, make only 2 selections of this or this. You just 2 selections in each column, in each column, and you can't do this and this over here. So this is something that is not allowed. This is not allowed. You have to choose 2 different options in 2 different columns here. Okay, so let's visualize the conclusion. The conclusion is that we believe that the strike is inevitable. Everyone got to this? Everyone was able to identify that this is the conclusion? Okay. So in other words, what you're translating this conclusion, when we visualize this, is to really say, hey, no matter what happens, that given this situation, given the workers' demands, the strike is going to happen. There's no way to avoid the strike. Okay. Is that clear? That's what the translation is. There's no way to avoid the strike, given the situation that we see ourselves in. Okay. So let's kind of look at the structure of the argument. We have a bunch of demands, which include pay increases, some lunch breaks, and there's the demand to hire some people. And then we have the financial situation that Faxam has, where they've had 3/4 of losses. These are the facts that the author presents to you. And based on these facts, the author says, hey, given Faxam's financial situation, we believe that the strike is inevitable. All right. Does a simplified argument structure work for you? Okay. So, same pre-thinking question. Under what circumstances, given the facts and the argument, will the conclusion break down? In other words, the translation is there a way in which we can prevent this strike given the demands of workers? So that's number one here. And then given the fact that Faxam has 3/4 of losses out of the last 4. Okay. So is there a way that we can prevent the strike? There are 2 ways to do that. One is if despite these losses, Faxam can get enough money, all right? Or if workers actually are just threatening and they don't proceed with the strike despite Faxam not meeting their demand. Okay. And you guys are coming up with really good answers as well. So if this is the way in which the conclusion breaks down, then the assumption is that Faxam does not have enough money or cannot get enough money. If this is the way in which my conclusion breaks down, then my assumption is that the workers will go on a strike even if their demands are not met. The pre-thinking assumptions, are both of these clear? Can you see how we went through the process and came up with these? We figured out how we're going to break the conclusion, and then we came up with assumptions. Okay. And then we're going to really look at what would strengthen this assumption. Faxam does not have enough money or cannot get enough money to satisfy the demands. If that's the case, then the strengtheners are, hey, the cash reserves are gone. Number 2, banks are not willing to give them money given their current financial situation, or Faxam simply has enough money, so it doesn't have enough cash, which is the same as saying number 1, that their cash reserves are depleted. If number 2 is there, then we either have workers having a history of following up with threats, or as per law, even if workers go on a strike, they'll be duly compensated. They'll get most of the compensation. Okay. Can you really see how both of these strengthen this? How all 3 of these strengthen this? Can you see the relationship? All of this is pre-thinking. We've not even looked at the answer choices as of yet. Not for the last one. Okay, but now that you've seen this, I know you've not gone through the strengthen module. We've not done the strengthen piece here. But now that I've explained this to you, can you see this? Can I please explain the last one? Which one? The assumption or the strengthener? The second strengthener. Okay. The assumption is that workers will go on a strike if their demands are not met. Now, what will strengthen this notion that workers will go on a strike that their demands are not met? If in the past workers have done that, right? If there are 3 other instances that where if demands have not been met, that workers have gone on a strike, which means that hey, the threats are not hollow. Or what would also strengthen this notion is that hey, even if they go on a strike, they'll continue to get paid. Right? Can you see how both of these notions strengthen? The conclusion. You see that? Yes, no. Okay, perfect. Yeah, kind of like, yeah, predicted below. By the way, do you know that actually happens? In India, you still get half your salary, I think. Okay. Let's look at choice A. What does choice A say? I'm going to actually show how you guys participated. I think the audio is coming through loud and clear. If you can't hear me, then just join again. But from what I can really see, the audio is pretty good. 2-7. This is how you guys polled for an assumption. Okay, choice E was the most popular choice. Actually, choice 6 was the most popular. I shouldn't call it E, it's F actually. And choice number 3 was also very popular. Okay, choice 1 wasn't as popular. So, choice A says here they'll be willing to compromise in one aspect. So, whenever you read an answer choice, ask yourself, what is this answer choice saying? Translate that, simplify that. And what this answer choice is saying is, out of the 3 things that workers want, they'll be willing to compromise on one part. Now, the question you have to ask is that an assumption? Is that required that the workers be willing to compromise on one aspect, which is paid lunch, for the strike not to happen? The answer is no. Okay. Um, Choice B, I think this was really popular. It says when the leaders call for a strike, the members inevitably vote to strike. So essentially, if the leader says, hey, we've got to go on strike, the members act upon it now. From the argument, do we know if the leader is calling for a strike? We don't know that. So again, irrelevant for us. Choice C plays on a classical trick, willingness to do something. I want to ask you guys, if the GMAT were not a required component of your MBA application, how many of you would be willing to spend your Saturday mornings or Saturday evenings with me studying for critical reasoning? Absolutely not. So are you willingly doing this, or are you being forced to do this? Okay. So willingness, preference has nothing to do with how we act. The companies that hire you do not pay you. Most top schools in the US offer the starting salaries are 170K. That's not something that companies pay willingly. The reason why companies pay 170K to 220K as your starting salaries is because of the competition. Okay. So willingness has nothing to do with it. Faxam may be unwilling to negotiate. At the same time, if it needs to, for it to run its own business, it will still negotiate. People who chose choice C, is that clear? In other words, the question you have to ask is it required that Faxon be willing to negotiate? No, it can be an unwilling party. The majority of losses were due to a significant decline in profits. It explains why did the losses happen. It says, hey, profit margins went down. That's why this happened. Again, ask yourself, is that required that this be the cause for losses? Okay, not necessarily, but again, it's a strengthener. Okay, so so again, we're going to keep it as a strengthener, and really just see what happens. Choice F, very few people chose choice E, so I'm not going to go there. Choice number 6 is FactSum does not have sufficient cash flow or cash reserves. This is absolutely correct, because if it has sufficient cash flow, then there's a way to avoid the strike. Okay, what this choice is saying is even if FactSum wanted to, it cannot meet the demands, and which is a must be true. Okay, now if this is my assumption, then what supports this assumption? This one over here supports this assumption. Why? Because if the losses were due to decline in profit margins, then they won't be able to generate enough cash. So this definitely supports this piece over here. So what are the takeaways for TPA? Make sure you do TPA or two-part analysis and both multi-source reasoning after you've done with quant and verbal, or if you prove that you have a sufficiently high ability, that's when you should do it. Again, the core skills remain the same, the process remains the same. You've got to still be methodical. It's not that you're going to learn something new in that. It's just that the application is slightly more advanced there. Okay, and you have the world's most comprehensive course for DI. All right. So I have two questions. How long is the session? We still have about 25 minutes there. Okay. What is the question about? I'll say MSR level. What does that mean? Yeah, MSR, we have the world's most comprehensive course. I mean, we've spent close to 18,000 hours building our DI offering. We are the only company in the world that has mocks. Okay. Sanket has another great question. It says, hey, while practicing CR, should you be able to explain why all the other choices are wrong? Yeah, absolutely. That's when you're learning this, when you're going through the course, you should be able to explain that as well. Okay. Now, before I go to question 4 and question 5, I want to just tell you the value of various parts of the course. So let's go through this. So I'm here in a student's account. You can see this is the CR course. You have two views here. This is the view that you guys are used to. Okay. And let me walk you through various pieces of the course. People who are asking about the ABC test, they are in the premise and conclusion part. You can really see, just to really tell you how to read an argument, how to think about an argument. We have about 2 to 2.5 hours of learning content, about 15 to 18 examples here. Even before that, we teach you how to read in the master comprehension course, where we talk about how our sentence is built, where should you pause while reading, how do you understand meaning, and this is absolutely critical. In fact, people who start, even those who start with extremely high starting ability, we want them to go through this course. Then you come to critical reasoning here. You do the premise and conclusion. The inference module is really important. A lot of that visualization that we talked about here is built in that inference module. And this is where we talk about how should you visualize only and all? How should you visualize some, most, the? These are really important words which lead to very powerful visualizations. And a lot of the incorrect options are built around this, both correct and incorrect, that is. And then we really teach you how to visualize and how do you draw inferences from multiple statements. We evaluate you. You can really see all of these over here have a score. There's a built-in quiz. We build technology within video to extract information and to give you feedback over here. Once you go through this, and this is the longest module, you can see just on inference, you spend a good 8 to 9 hours here. You go through assumption. You go through all sorts of assumptions. This is an introduction, then this is arguments which have logical gaps. Here you have arguments where you compare two entities, where you compare segments. Here in concept 4, you have entities and segments both, and then you have quant-based arguments. The idea here is that for every argument type, you should be able to figure out how to do pre-thinking. Again, each file builds certain skills. When you're going through this, do not worry about the timing. This is to build your visualization ability. In this entire assumption module, you have 50 arguments. If you go through them properly, for a majority of you, your comprehension skills will have improved by the end of this module. You do the same thing with evaluate. Now you've learned all the argument types, so you see just one concept file, and you directly go towards application here. So you have 3 application files, 3 practice quizzes. Again, you have close to 20-25 evaluate arguments here. This is still the learning part. You will have gone through every question type here. You repeat the same thing in assumption, but another 40 questions in assumption here. Do the same thing in weaken, another 40 questions or so in weaken. Same thing in boldface, but 20 to 25 questions in boldface. And then you go through fill in the blanks, logically complete, flaw, paradox, and all the other question types are here. Okay, and then after that, you go through the cementing process, the process of filling an error log, and you have these cementing process. So overall, throughout this course, just through the course part, the learning part, you have about 457 arguments, and then you go through Scholaranium, which gives you, I think, another 250 to 300 questions here in this case. Okay, if you get to a hard accuracy of 50%, you get to a 65th percentile ability. If you get to a hard accuracy of 75%, you get to a 90th percentile ability here. Now, let's just go back to the course. Some of you asked, what is this journey view? Now, you can really see here that that there are lots and lots of data points here. The entire course has about 9 or rather 8 modules, or close to 97 files, and you have these 97 data points where you have to evaluate, and in somewhere you have an 86%, somewhere you have a 40%, and so you have to make judgment as to how you're doing in this, which is where we build this view called a journey view, where we've used AI. What we've done is we've combined this, we've kind of broken this course down into 4 different learning levels. You see LL0, LL1, LL2, and LL3, and we rate you against other people in this learning level. If you get a grade A in a learning level, what it really tells you is that you are in the top 10% of all people who've gone through this course, and about 20,000 people have gone through this course. And you get a grade B, you're in the top 50%. When you're in the grade A minus, you're in 70 to 85% over here. So when you look at this here, you can really figure out how you've done. And you get these grades at an activity level. Here again, you can see in the first attempt, you got an 86%. That led to a grade A over here. Why? Because the median score in this was 64%. In premise and conclusion too, even though you got an 89% here, you got a grade C because the median score on this file is 93%. And this is really, really important for you to know. Why? Because the moment you get to see this grade, you may be happy with that 89%, but what this has indicated is that you were lax while doing this, and because you were lax, you did worse than what the general population does. You were in the bottom 50% for this particular file, and that can really tell you for the next file you've got to be more careful. Okay, for those of you who are so this is completely done AI. So this is essentially when we look at it, there's a neural network that looks at all of this data and combines this data to give you an overall module or learning level grade in this case. And for people who actually get a grade of B or higher at a course level, they have a very high correlation with that with regards to them succeeding in cementing here. Okay, if you are someone who was a free trial user, you can sample some of these files by going to the free trial here and looking at the critical reasoning files here. We can do some GI, some number properties. You can do some MSR and RC as well. We have the algebra session tomorrow. You can also do some algebra files. So hopefully that does that help you understand how to go through this, how to interpret this data. And this took a lot of effort to do this for each and every course. So you guys can use this so that you guys get something that's extremely predictable for you. And these journey grades are updated with every activity, so they're upgraded every 30 minutes. And we're the only company in the world that has this. Now, we'll do the last question today, and so this is a very interesting question. Again, this tells you the importance of visualization. Let me put in a poll question here. So here, I want you to select not answered. I want 20 people to select not answered. That way, I won't time you when you choose an option other than not answered. That's when I'm going to call time. And 80% of you choose an option other than not answered. Come on, I have just 11 people who've chosen not answered. I want 20 people to choose not answered. 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. Okay, I'm going to remove broadcast result. Here is the question. I'm going to mute myself, guys. All right, get those answers in. 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. I'm going to end the poll. And I'm going to broadcast the results. You can see choices C, D. C and D are both very popular. Choice A is somewhat popular as well. Choice E is kind of popular. I expected more people to choose choice E. Usually that is also a popular choice. But in general, how did you find this question? How was this question? Good, hard. This is a 700 level question as well. It's an official question. And one of the things that you're going to really see is that if you visualize this, you're going to be able to figure out how uh, uh, to figure out why the correct answer is correct, and you're going to be able to reject the incorrect options very, very easily. Okay. And if you go search for this question on GMAT, you're going to see about 3 pages of discussions, and they don't get to the correct answer. So what's happening here? Last year, we collected a bunch of refuse. We didn't recycle anything. We actually sent everything for incineration. Now let's assume one garbage can is equivalent to one truck. How many trucks full of garbage did we send last year for incineration? How many garbage cans are here? 10. So how many trucks did we send for incineration last year? 10, right? Now this year, what are we going to do? We're going to recycle some, and we're only going to send half as many for incineration, correct? So we're going to cut that by half. Now I have a question for you over here. If this year we collect 10 times as much refuse, if we collect 10 times as much refuse, then how many truckloads do you think will we send for incineration this year? I want you to read the argument and answer this question. If we collect 10 times as much garbage, as per the information given in the argument, how many trucks do you think will we send for incineration? So last year we sent 10 trucks. We collect 10 times as much garbage. Five, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Let me end the poll. Now broadcast results. You can really see only 21% of you got this right. The correct answer is 5. Despite the fact that we collected 100 trucks worth of refuse, we're only going to send 5 trucks for incineration, not 50, not 100. Let's see why. Let's read this line. This year, city services will separate for recycling enough refuse to reduce the number of truckloads to be incinerated to half of last year's number. What this is saying is that regardless of how much refuse is collected, I'm only going to send just as many trucks as half as many trucks as were sent last year. Is that clear? Can you see the visualization and the translation of that visualization into this over here? Even if you collect 10 times as much refuse, if you sent 10 trucks last year, you're going to send 5 trucks this year. I want to see it. What is it that you're not able to understand? What this is saying is this year, the city services is going to collect enough refuse to reduce, to is a purpose word, the number of truckloads to be incinerated to half of last year's number. So if last year we sent 10 trucks, this year we're going to separate enough refuse so that we're only going to send 10 divided by 2, which is 5 trucks for incineration. Okay. So my conclusion is that the ash generated this year would be half of what was generated last year. That's my conclusion. In what scenario will that conclusion break down if I know I'm only going to send half as many trucks for incineration? In what scenario will I break this conclusion down? In what scenario will the ash generated be more than 50% if I only get half as many trucks for incineration? If those trucks are so tightly packed that the amount of ash goes up per truck, the average amount of ash generated per truck goes up, right? That's the only scenario in which my conclusion will go down. If this breaks my conclusion down, my assumption is that the ash per truckload is similar to or lower than what it was last year. Now, given the information in the argument, we don't care about recycling. Why? Because, what do we know? We're only going to get half as many truckloads for incineration. We don't care about anything else as long as we don't incinerate it, right? Why? Because incineration or burning something generates ash. Correct? So let's look at the answer choices. I'm going to show the poll once again. Sorry, where did my poll go? Select poll. This is how you guys polled here. 5 of you chose choice A. Another 10 chose choice C. Choice D was chosen by 11 folks, and then choice C was chosen by 9 folks. Choice A says, this year, no material that city services could utilize for recycling would be incinerated. It is a must-be true condition. The problem is it doesn't provide any new information. You can infer this from the argument. Because it doesn't provide any new information, even though this is a must-be true condition, this is not the correct assumption because of lack of new information. Choice B talks about cost. We don't care about cost. Choice C talks about the proportion of recyclable materials. Doesn't matter to us. Why? Because we'll only get half as many trucks for incineration. People who chose choice C, 10 of you chose choice C. Is that clear to you? Folks who chose choice C. Okay. Choice D, which is our correct answer, talks about the ash per truckload. It is in line with our pre-thinking. Okay, you can see the negation test being applied over here as well. Choice E talks about the total quantity of refuse. The total quantity doesn't matter. Why? Because we're only going to send half as many truckloads. So even if you get 10x as much refuse, that is immaterial. Okay. All right. What's your takeaway from this? What is your takeaway? Negation technique is a great validation, absolutely, but you've got to understand the argument before you apply negation. Don't apply negation as a hammer. Why? Because if you apply it as a hammer, you're going to take a lot longer. You're not going to get things right. Yes. Struggling with visualization. Yes. Go back to the inference module. That's where you learn visualization. If you're struggling with visualization, most likely your learning level 1 grade is not great. Feels like a mountain. Does it seem like a fun mountain to climb? Growing slowly helps solving quickly. Absolutely. Read carefully the argument. And the person who says feels like a mountain. Does it feel like a fun mountain to climb? And one thing that I'm going to tell you is, if you learn how to read CR, or rather how to read arguments, you're going to be able to, use this as a tool in negotiations. You're going to be able to understand how uh, uh, to read contracts. You're going to be able to understand how reporters will try and make you believe something without really making claims there. How do you deal with passages from different areas such as humanities, sciences, etc.? You just read them the same way. They're no different, trust me. You do not need domain knowledge in CR. Get me any question, I'm going to solve it for you without any domain knowledge. Okay. Again, this isn't rocket science. It's a tool that helps you get answers faster. And if you build the core skills and if you use the tool, you're going to achieve 90th, forget about 90th, even 99th percentile fairly easily. So how do you go about doing this? Start with the very fundamentals. Start uh, uh, with essentially going through premise and conclusion, then the inference module, and then constantly monitor your grades and go on from there. Okay. With that, I am going to actually share the session PDF with you. I want to thank everyone who joined who connected with me on LinkedIn. I saw about 20 of you did that. So definitely, stay in touch and also look at the updates that I post about the uh, essentially about things going on in the B school. GMAT should contain grammatical questions and remove CR. Why? Why should a B school test have grammar? Especially in today's world where you have ChatGPT, where you can express express what you want to say in any language. Why should a test that evaluates your fit for B schools have grammar? I'm actually going to be meeting the CEO of GMAT next week, and I'm going to congratulate him for taking SC away now. That, I think, is one of the best things they did. Yeah, if you answer just one correctly, you don't get a score. You've got to answer both correct. Okay. A bunch of questions here. One is, does your course contain original questions, or are they official questions? No, our course contains original questions. They are made by e-GMAT experts. We spend a lot of time doing R&D. I have another question which is, what if I buy the course, I don't like it? Do you have a refund policy? Yes, we have a 7-day refund policy. So if you don't like it, just let us know. Again, don't abuse the course, but I mean, the policy is fairly lax. I haven't seen anyone who's asked for a refund abuse it in the last 2.5 years. So okay. How much should you get in verbal if you want to score 695 if your quant and DI are very high? Let me just say this. It's very difficult to, on quant, you can get to an 88. So to get a 695, you need to get, I think, 251. Let me just get. Let me tell you GMAT focus study plan. I'm going to share an article with you which has the sum of scores. Yeah, to get a 695, you need 253 as sum of scores. You can really get this table from this article here. If you're an e-GMAT, your PSP gives you that. So 253 means if you can get an 88 in quant, and 83 in DI, then you need an 82 in verbal. Grammar SC helps with meaning. So if you learn SC through using the meaning-based approach, then yes, definitely it helps with meaning. Yes. Is it possible to have coffee sessions for students based in EU right now? Yeah, they're at 7:30 in the morning. We can make it work. Absolutely. we can make it work to have a coffee session for students based on EU. We can also share the recording. Samarth, you can also send your questions to me on email. You can write to me on rajada.e-gmat, and I'll be happy to record a Loom video for you. The problem really is we have about 65% of all our students from India. And I don't know. I'm just going to ask a yes, no question here. We have about 40 of you here. Fridays, it's about noon or noon IST. That would be about 7:30 a.m. Europe time. How many of you, those of you who are from India, would be willing to attend? Noon on Friday. How many of you would be willing to attend a coffee session with Pyle and I? About half of you. Okay. So let me actually clear the poll question. If this session were at 7:30 in the morning IST, how many of you would be willing to attend? 7:30 in the morning. Interesting. Why not 7:30 in the morning? I thought that'd be a lot more conducive given the fact that you guys need to reach office by 9:30. Okay. Work. Okay. All right. That makes sense. Weekdays are hard. All right. That makes a lot of sense. Imal is saying pace for quant when you have pace for verbal and DI. So DI actually, so verbal, you want to do that. DI, we evaluated doing pace. Pace, for those of you who don't know, this is personalized adaptive course engine. It's something that that actually in we have this in quant. It builds custom courses for you. So if you're someone who's starting with a medium to high ability in quant, you don't have to go through the entire course. Now, a lot of DI is purely application. So we want you to go through the DI course, even if you have a reasonably good ability, because a lot of DI, going through the DI courses is going through an enhanced practice module with video solutions. So DI, you've got to go through this. So I don't want to do it over there, but verbal, that's something that we'll definitely do in math. Okay. If you're in Delhi NCR, I'm going to really see if we can come up with a meet. Pyle and I are actually, as I said, we'll be in Delhi next Tuesday and Wednesday to meet the CEO of the GMAC. So if you have questions about the GMAT, the Focus Edition, or if there's something that you want to communicate to the GMAC, it'd be great if you can write to us. Okay. All right, guys, with that, I want to thank everyone for joining me today. If you have questions, if you have concerns, do write to me. If you need a study plan, log into your e-GMAT account, do the free trial, and you'd get a prompt for the study plan. But as next steps, go through the free trial. Make sure you do that. And for those of you who are paid students, make sure you do the course. Make sure you look at your journey stats. Make sure that you improve upon it. You celebrate every A grade. You look at how can you improve if you get a B or a B minus or a A minus, because the more you focus during the learning phase, the better you would be during cementing. Okay. The marathon. Well, I love teaching, so some of this is already brewing. I'll have to talk to Pyle about Sunday marathon sessions. In this case, yes. Okay. The recording of which session? Which session? Today's session? It'll be in your inboxes in about 10 hours. Okay. With that, thank you very much, and I'll see you on e-GMAT.com. As Pyle always says, happy learning.